So we're back with another NBA preview. Preseason kicks off on Saturday, less than 2 weeks away until the proper season. So the countdown is well and truly on. Today, we're going to look at the Mavericks, and I'm joined by none other than Dallas diehard Darcy Emery. A lot of D's in there. So Darcy, thanks very much for taking the time out to come on the pod.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, the Mavericks have a lot of buzz and hype, which isn't unexpected just due to how you guys performed in the bubble, especially stealing 2 games from the Clippers. KP went down. Luka was battling that rolled ankle, so he was kind of playing on one leg. And you guys managed to steal a couple from them, which leads us into this season. Now, before we jump into that, we'll quickly look at the offseason. Now, you guys were pretty active in the trade market, making a couple of deals. You were, let's say, expectedly quiet in free agency, just due to the fact that you're obviously preserving cap space for a certain guy in Milwaukee if he becomes available next summer. And in the draft, you had a late teens pick in the first round, and you also had an early second rounder that you utilized with that selection. Now, how do you assess the Mavs offseason?
Well, yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot of expectation on the team. I think that's where you want to be, I think, in a lot of ways. We've kind of been on that peripheral ever since Dirk finished. They're not really a contending team, and I think we're trying to thrust ourselves right into it right now. I think I really enjoyed some of the moves our team has made, and when you think about how we were able to basically steal Doncic in the draft only a couple of years ago, trading away Trae Young and a pick that turned out to be DeAndre Hunter, I think I'd take Luka over those two guys personally. So that's I think our staff's done a really, really good job. I was a bit kind of unsure about Josh Green as a prospect, but I always kind of thought he was going to definitely get picked as a kind of a late lottery guy. And I think I'm starting to understand how he could really fit in our team quite well. And I think buying low on Josh Richardson was a massive get as well. I think his defensive prowess, I guess he didn't show anything of what he could be in Philly. I think it was all a bit of a disaster there. It's one of those situations where moving to a new team might just make him instantly a better player because he was in a bad situation. But and everyone who I've spoken to about Tyrell Terry absolutely loves him and think he could be a good player. I like his stroke, and I think that he's a multi-skill kind of player. So I think picking up all those guys in the offseason was pretty sweet. But I think my favourite move of the offseason, I think it's definitely a low-key move. I'm not sure if people even remember that this guy's in the league, but James Johnson was a guy that we picked up.
No way. I've got him as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you like him?
Yeah.
I think I didn't realise he's played 11 years in the league, and obviously he plays best ball in Miami. And I actually just read today that he was cleared for 5-on-5 activities, and I think he could really break into the rotation pretty quickly. Like, he's a 6'7" guy, 109 kilos, and he's definitely one of the toughest guys in the league. Like, I just love his fit with, I think that as a team, the Mavs definitely need to improve defensively. I think that's a massive focus for them. Getting a guy like him to pair with guys like Richardson and Green, who are good on the wing, guarding other teams' best guards, being disruptive and getting deflections. I think James Johnson can give us like a toughness that we haven't had, especially we didn't have last season. He give us a veteran presence and someone really physical that can like match up to the strongest guys in the Western Conference. Like we talk about LeBrons and the ADs and the Jokic's, like you need someone who's a tough body who can really go at it. And I think one big thing that stands in my mind is in the Clippers series when Doncic had that rolled ankle and when Morris stepped on his ankle, kind of there wasn't that guy who was willing to step in and almost like basically fight Marcus Morris and say, we're not going to be pushed around like this. Like we've kind of missed that edge, I suppose. And I think this is a big move getting James Johnson. I think he's the kind of guy who can really put fear in other teams' minds. And I think he's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife as well. Like shoots 47% for his career. He made a 3 last year per game on 36% shooting, a steal and a block. Like he's the type of guy I reckon could play in late game situations and give us that toughness.
Yeah, no, well, it's very funny you mentioned James Johnson. I had him down in my notes as the favorite move as well because there's such an appealing aspect, him being on this roster, as you mentioned, just with his toughness. I mean, the fact that he's also just a versatile offensive player. You can easily go small ball. If you wanted to push Maxi Kleber at the 5, you can put James Johnson at the 4. I think he will be an important piece to start the season, obviously, with no KP and Dwight Powell coming back from injury. But we can get to that a bit later. But I think where we'll really see his value is in the postseason. And that's due to just the fact, as you said, his experience, he's a veteran presence, his toughness. He's another just hard-nosed guy that you can throw at all the names you mentioned, plus if they're even there, which I assume they will be, a Kawhi, Paul George for a sort of rematch of last year's series. So definitely a lot to like. Mentioned that Tyrell Terry, many people were saying he's sort of a Seth Curry light, Seth Curry 2.0. So it's just shrewd business by Dallas to definitely get an underappreciated asset in Josh Richardson and then potentially get the next Seth Curry. Credit to the Mavs. They've done it again. Now, just being a Sixers fan myself, Josh Richardson, there's absolutely no reason he can't go back to the guy he was in Miami because, as you say, it was a disaster with us. He was sort of forced into, at times, being a perimeter scorer just due to the fact that Simmons, that's not his game. And so now that he can go to Dallas, the focus is on Luka. He just needs to hit perimeter shots. He can then take the best perimeter guy from the other team. Everything is looking very rosy in Dallas. And so then I guess to kind of bring the negative into it, to go into sort of the injury dilemma, the only real question mark is obviously KP's leg injury, the fact that Dwight Powell is coming back from an Achilles. We know Luka's history with ankles. He missed games during the regular season. I believe it was a period in potentially November, December last year before they obviously stopped the season. But even when that happened, I'm pretty sure Dallas went on a run there as KP sort of took over. I remember they went into Milwaukee and beat the Bucks. They smashed Philly at home. Yeah, who I think they also went into Toronto, nearly beat Toronto. Toronto went on a crazy third, fourth quarter run and came back to sort of steal that game. But that was in Dallas's control for, at least a half, 3/4 of that. So even with all those sort of concerns, Dallas is still a strong enough team to be able to overcome all those injuries, which goes to prove just how well thought out their roster is. Now, just with the KP injury, he's meant to be back. I think it's early to mid-January if things are on track and on schedule. Dwight Powell is a guy who relied on his athleticism and sort of speed to beat his matchup. Definitely a guy that rolled hard to the rim off the pick and roll. So with those sort of two question marks, who do you think needs to step up, obviously, to start that season?
It's a good point. I think I'm not as concerned about Kristap's injury as I guess a lot of other people are, at least this specific injury. So it's always a lingering thing with him, and the fact that he's on track to return in January, I guess, is optimistic. If it's not till the end of January, we're only talking 4 or 5 weeks of basketball without him. And I think if there's one guy who can carry an offensive load, it's Luka. If Luka has to put up an extra few amount of shots, I'm not necessarily that concerned about that. I think, but picking up the slack, at the center position, I think it's definitely going to be collective effort. And you talked about the depth that Dallas have. Pretty much at every position, we've really got solid depth, I think, and we rely on multiple guys to give us a few points here and there every time they come in the game. I think in the front line, I like some of the stuff that Kleber did. He had some awesome moments on defense and shooting the ball in the bubble. I really like his game. You can tell he's out of Würzburg, Germany, because the guy can shoot the ball 100%.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think James Johnson and even Dwight Powell, they're also quite capable 3-point shooters. And one thing that's basically happened with all of our players last year playing with Luka is they got some really open looks, uncontested 3-point shots. If they can get anywhere near 40%, like James Johnson and Dwight Powell from 3, then I think that's going to help us scoring the ball a lot well to cover up some of what KP does every game. I think hearing that Powell is 100% ready to go is it's great news. Like, I guess the extended layoff with the bubble and whatever has given him time to come off that Achilles. And obviously he relies a lot on his athleticism, but he's probably always been in peak physical condition. Like, he looks like a bit of an Adonis, basically,
Yeah.
Powell. And I think he's the part of his game that's huge for the Mavs, I reckon, is his pick and roll as a lob threat. Like, he can play above the rim. He was amazing with it with JJ Barea, and obviously with Doncic, who's a great lob passer. I think that's critical to our offensive balance, like being able to score at the rim as well as shooting threes. I think with KP out, there's actually a massive opportunity for Willie Cauley-Stein.
Yep.
I think with KP in the lineup, there's not really a lot of minutes for Cauley-Stein, but with him out, I think Cauley-Stein for me was pretty disappointing in Golden State. I thought he could have been that kind of lob threat and that guy to block shots, but I think he's got another opportunity, golden opportunity on a great team or like a strong team right now. And I expect him to come out of the season at the beginning, the start of the season with, opportunity to grab that kind of starting spot. Yeah, I think it's a big opportunity for him. And I guess the final thing with replacing KP would be extra minutes for Boban, which is always good. Because I think every time he's on the floor, if he can get 15 to 20 minutes a game, you're talking a double-double. Like, there's no one in the league that can guard him. He's probably only good for 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes will be productive.
No, it's funny, the Boban thing. Everyone loves to make fun of his height and all that stuff. But you actually look at his numbers. You actually watch him closely, his productivity. The guy can play. There's no doubt about that. He's not just in there for comedic value, that's for sure. For me, I second the Kleber. I think he's criminally underrated. Definitely a guy that spaces the floor on offense. He then runs the floor hard. He's going to be a guy that's similar to Powell, can roll hard to the rim. He's going to be a lob threat. I think then on defense, he's also a guy that's got super active hands. I mean, I felt like I watched quite a fair bit of Dallas in the bubble, and the amount of times you'd come away with steals, the amount of times he'd actually, which I didn't know he had, just a really strong ability to protect the rim. He was actually a phenomenal shot blocker. His timing is pretty excellent, and he's disciplined when defending the post. He doesn't normally give away silly fouls. And he just, I think similar to a few other European players in the past, he just brings a level of grit. So just looking at this sort of Mavericks roster and how deep you guys go, is it accurate that a starting lineup would be something along the lines of a Doncic, J. Rich? I had Finney Smith at the 3, and then Kleber at the 4, and Willie Cauley-Stein at the 5. What are your thoughts regarding that?
I think that's a pretty good lineup. I think I've always liked what Dodo brings to the team. I think you need someone who's going to match up against the other team's wings. And he is a good 3-point shooter. I think, he's a guy who's shown at times he can play long minutes, long stretches, lots of defense, and really be a positive for your team. I think there's one thing that's quite unique about Doncic is, he plays the point guard spot, but his size and his rebounding make him almost a small forward. Like, he is huge. He dominates the defensive glass. So I think in a team where we continue to prioritize shooting, we're a great 3-point shooting team, I think you can't really at this stage have a starting lineup without Hardaway Jr. So I think it'll be Doncic with Hardaway. And I think J. Rich will still get the start. And then it might be a situation of, I think Powell, if he's ready to go, will get the start as well. But if not, then it might be Finney Smith at the 4. And then I think Cauley-Stein will get that first look at the center position because you know how stable Kleber is off the bench.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Hardaway was definitely a guy that I had him in the second unit, but when looking at it, I was like, oh, it's probably not enough shooting, just due to already having Cauley-Stein out there. But yeah, that sort of takes us as the second unit. I think Brunson's the most important guy for that second unit. I think he'll be the first guy off the bench if Hardaway is in that starting lineup. But there's another ability here where it just goes to show again further to the depth and how well Dallas have nailed that with Luka not on the floor, which to start the season and I think throughout the season won't be very often, but a guy like Brunson, who's as reliable as they come, has the experience. He's already 24, so he did obviously play quite a few years in Villanova and guy that can then also play next to Luka, which is just as important. But he can run a team. He can take control himself. He's shown an ability to create off the dribble, hit pull-up shots. He can operate in the pick and roll quite comfortably. And even though he's 6'1", he's kind of in that Kyle Lowry mold, just very tough, hard to move off the block. And I actually have him as a dark horse 6th man of the year. I think he could potentially make a lot of noise. I think the fact that Schroeder and Harrell are on the Lakers, they kind of rule themselves out. So I think the only real guy to worry about potentially in that race is Lou Williams if he has a bounce back. That's sort of the name that comes to mind. But I think Brunson has a real shot at that 6th man of the year. How do you feel about Jalen this season?
I think that's a good point. I think it could have kind of got lost how we missed him in the bubble. I suppose he is a very smart player. He's well smart. Like you said, he played a bunch of years at college, and you could tell that he was national player of the year in college. Guy like playing the post even as a guard, and he developed his shooting from the 3-point line last year. Like you said, he can actually play make situation where Luka's at the shooting guard. It's really good for our team. It makes the versatility even better. I think I get in trouble with this often with the Mavs. I like all of their guys, and Carlisle is very heavy on point guards, playmaking point guards, and I really like and have always liked Trey Burke. I think even since his days at Michigan, it didn't work out when he got drafted to Utah, but I think the way he played in the bubble and just his natural speed, like he was able to beat guys off the dribble all the time, and is confident in his pull-up game. And he maybe not as good a facilitator, but he can still make assists as well. So I think it'll be a really interesting fight between those two. And I think that could play into Brunson potentially, I don't know, maybe being a little bit discouraged about how much court time he gets. But that our backup point guard duo is really, really solid. And I think that our bench will be able to produce points for sure. I think with those two leading the way, I think I also like what Carlisle does. He mixes up the rotations often. I think Burke will get a chance to start, and I definitely think Brunson will. When you hear Carlisle talk about Brunson, he raves about him. And even in his rookie year, he was like, we're going to need him to play big minutes. And I expect that again, especially as we get into playoffs.
Yeah, no, for sure. Totally agree. Another ex-Philly guy, so to speak, just obviously didn't work with us. It seems like we're some sort of cancer, and then go to a system like the Mavericks and just thrive. So look, it hurts. As a Sixers fan, there's 6 or 7 guys at least on Dallas's roster that I'd love to snag. But anyway, not to be how you think the Mavs will go this season in terms of season wins. What seeding do you think you guys will get? And then how far do you think you'll go in the playoffs?
Yeah, get into the fun stuff, get into the stuff that really matters. I don't read in too much to the amount of wins that we get, or as long as we make the playoffs, at least. It felt like, thank God we made the playoffs last year. It felt like forever since we made it, after we had so many good years in a row of making it in the Dirk dynasty. But I think we're really well positioned to win the division, with Houston probably being the only big threat, and who knows what on earth's going on there. Yeah. I think in terms of wins, I think we're looking at a range of between 42 and 46. I think barring a significant Luka injury, I think we're a home court playoff team. And I think probably at worst, we'd think about like a 5 seed. And I genuinely believe if things start to click right from the jump, I think that we've got a shot at the 2nd seed in the Western Conference.
Huge. How about for the playoffs? Where do you think you can go in that?
I think in the playoffs, it depends a lot on matchups. I think a team that'd be really difficult to match up with. Obviously, I think every team in the West has this problem trying to match up with the Lakers and their physicality in the front court. Like if you've got to put an outstanding physical defender on Davis, then who's going to take LeBron? If he's playing at his highest level, it's really, really tough. I think our depth is one of our biggest strengths, as we already talked about. Like, I feel like we have to get points from all kinds of guys to go deep in the playoffs. So I'm expecting guys like Josh Richardson and Dwight Powell, Burke, Finney-Smith, and then even Cleveland and Brunson to get close to 10 points per game. And I think it's important that we get that kind of spread. And if we do kind of click. And I think that's what happened last year is people kind of rode on the coattail of Luka is getting it done every game. If we just chip in our little bit, then we're going to get over 100 points a game. And if we can stop the ball a little bit, then we're going to be able to beat any team on any night. And some of those victories against the Clippers in the playoffs, like they weren't flukes, you know, like we were playing at a high level and guys were gelling. So I think if we can continue that chemistry, then there's no reason why we can't be one of the very best teams in the West.
I have you guys for 43 wins. So as you say, in that 42 to 46 range, I think you guys will actually finish off with the 6th seed. Now, depending on who the top 4 is, not exactly sure, but I think in some order it'll be Lakers, Clippers, Denver. I have Portland pushing for the 4 seed. I think Phoenix will finish the 5th seed. And then I think it's you guys that come in there at the 6th seed. Every chance you guys obviously gel from the start, as you mentioned, and things click and, you know, sky's the limit. And I think there's a real chance to finish off at the 2nd seed there. I don't think anyone can jump the Lakers. Even if AD misses games, LeBron rests to start the season, the additions of Schroeder and Harrell are just too much in terms of the fact that they can come in and definitely win the Lakers plenty of games throughout the regular season. But I think you guys, no matter if you finish in the 6th seed, I actually think you guys can get to the Western Conference Finals. Firmly believe that KP is a truly dominant big man. All the question marks are just around health. Performance hasn't been an issue since definitely coming to Dallas. You can question whether certain nights he took off in the Knicks or the dilemma that he had there with wanting to leave. But the overall roster, the coaching, you can't rule them out of making the conference finals. I think that would be silly to make a move like that. So yeah, look, sky's the limit. I'm fully on board, and I'm not the biggest Mavericks fan, but I can just see everything's trending in the right way. Who do you think will be the best player outside of Luka and KP? Who do you think will be that third guy that quite consistently the Mavs can just go to, or even just a guy that the Mavs fans can clearly see as, you know, that third guy outside of Luka and KP?
That's a good question. I think all the teams basically looking for that second or that third superstar guy, like that guy can really dominate. And I think that's why people expected a lot of things out of the Clippers last year. And obviously Denver have a great 1-2 punch. Now they've lost Jerami Grant. So what are they going to do? A lot of people are bullish on Phoenix now that they've picked up CP3 to go along with Ayton and obviously Booker. So, like, when you just rattle off those names in the Western Conference, like, those teams are deep and those teams are tough. And then when I was looking over at the conference standings from last year, there was 6 teams that finished on 44 wins, basically. So it's an extremely tight race in the Western Conference. And this, for me, the third option for Dallas, it's got to be Hardaway Jr. If he can add a little bit more kind of penetration and playmaking to his game, some finishing at the rim and get to the free throw line a little bit more, to add that with his elite 3-point shooting, like that'd really help us a lot. You know, like I loved how he responded last season when I think a month into the season, Carlisle tried some different lineups, moved him to the bench, and then he kind of took that real personally. And he balled out and he shut that down real quick and came out with career best production. And he showed that, you know, I'm the best shooting guard on this roster. And if he can improve as a defender this season and really start to hold his own on that end of the floor, I think he's clearly our third option. I think when you talk about a team like the Mavs and the way that we operate with our roster, we are always looking to make moves. And that's one thing I love about the franchise in general is we're always looking to improve. We're never going to be static in what we're doing. So he's got quite a large contract and it's quite movable, especially if he starts to play great ball. So if he starts to look like a third option, especially out the gate, I wouldn't be surprised if we start fielding offers, try to look for that third option to bring in another star to pair with KP and Luka.
Yeah, no, very, very good point you make. For me, just to go, I had Brunson, but I'll go someone different. I truly believe it'll be Josh Richardson. Just the fact, if you go back to those Miami teams, especially the 2 years he was there, significant amount of offensive load was actually put on him. There wasn't the emergence then. They hadn't drafted Bam by that stage. A lot of, I suppose, the Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, LeBron, as soon as that sort of departed, Bosh was obviously dealing with his injuries. Was it Wade went to Chicago potentially that year? He might have gone back to the Bulls. So Miami were quite depleted. They were looking to go in a new direction. And Josh Richardson, being a second-round pick out of Tennessee, he just came in and really surprised everyone. So his three-point shooting completely dropped off with Philly, which, of course, like everyone, they come to Philly, the three-point shooting is less than 30%. But with Josh Richardson now in this Dallas system, I expect him to be high 30s, if not early 40s, just due to the fact there'll be open looks. On top of that, I think there'll be such an appreciation for his ability to pick up the best perimeter guard on the opposing team. That'll take just so much strain off Dallas's probably need in the past to go, look, we've probably got to outscore this team to be able to get past him because we just don't have the defensive prowess to be able to slow opposition offenses down and star players. But that's totally different this year. So I don't think there'll be a true need for Dallas to get in the, high 130s, high 120s shootout type games this year, which makes things a lot easier. It doesn't then mean that, Doncic needs to go berserk. I still think he will and get his numbers. But the fact that you can then, I think now, actually start to rely on your defense a little bit more than you ever could in the past, suddenly definitely takes the pressure off the offensive load, definitely puts the team in a position to, have their style of play translate to the postseason much better than past seasons. So give me Josh Richardson for your guys' third best player. Wouldn't surprise me if he averaged somewhere in the mid-teens, around 15 points, picked up a couple of steals a game. Could even be go as far as be in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. Believe in him that much.
Or at least all
very
defensive,
gutted.
yeah.
Yeah, it was very gutted. It didn't work out with us. But just to quickly go on that, love the trade for us. We obviously needed Seth Curry. I think it was a perfect trade between Dallas and Philly. Clearly filled some needs for both sides. So it would be definitely an interesting matchup between Philly and Philly and Dallas. I hope it's when KP's healthy, because I'm not sure if we've got you guys on the schedule for those first 30 games that were released. But Doncic against Simmons, KP against Embiid, Josh Richardson against Seth Curry. There's a lot to like there in that matchup in particular. So we'll definitely have to get together for that matchup if that takes place, Darcy.
Yeah, let's do it 100%. Man, I love Curry as well. It was hard to see him go.
Yeah.
It really was. We're buying low on Richardson there, but I think Curry, you're selling about as high as you possibly could. Guy was outstanding last year, like ridiculous. Yep. He's about as wet as it can get for the perimeter.
Yeah, absolutely. What is he, mid-40s from three, 44, 45%. So that's
better
ridiculous.
Than his brother when you work the percentages.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think about your two picks from the draft there in Green and Tyrell Terry?
I think Carlisle, he's still quite old school. He's not as old school as maybe Popovich, when he basically buries his rookies down on the bench. But
yeah.
But I think he understands guys who can score the ball and guys who can play make. And I think that's one thing that stands out to me about Tyrell Terry is that guy can really shoot the ball and he has a nice smooth game. I can see him slotting into our kind of point guard, combo guard situation very quickly. I think Carlo already talked about the 3-and-D prowess of Green, and I think that's basically all you got to see out of Green if you saw college. He's on the wing, and when he's open, he can shoot threes, and he's an athlete. So I think those guys will definitely get time in roles. I think because of the high expectations and obviously kind of the developing depth of our squad, I think their probably opportunities will be quite limited unless there's an injury. But when those injuries does come up, they'll probably be thrown potentially even straight into the starting lineup if there's enough injury cloud going on. So I expect him to go deep into the bench as much as he can, especially for getting into leads early in the game. I think that those guys will get into it. And I think the additions just fit quite well. I think they kind of fit the way that we're doing. They're offensively minded players, Green with a little bit more defensive upside. And I think it'll be interesting to see how much Carlisle switches up the lineups to give us a real defensive look, because we talked about James Johnson, we talked about Jay Rich, how those two could play together. And then if we put in another defensive-minded shooting guard, then, it's a real defensive lineup. And then the prowess of KP defending the rim and kind of making up for mistakes on the perimeter makes us potentially a team who could really lock guys down. Didn't really see much of that at all last season, but I think it gives us a whole nother look. And I think those additions they'll give us a chance to play a little bit differently, especially on the defensive end, which is exciting. And I think it's a good chance for growth.
Okay, quick break to say you'll hear a static noise from my mic, annoyingly, in the next minute or two. I tried to reduce the impact it was having and even deleted my audio in certain parts. But Darcy here gives out a good Josh Green story from when he was playing ball at Kings, so you will hear a little bit of static from my end. Then following that, I cut my audio, so please note that it goes straight from the Josh Green story into Darcy giving out his Mavs hot take, but then the audio from my end is normal after that. So back to the pod.
Scott's in year 7. I had a game when we played up against Kings when Josh was in year 7. And I was coaching the A's, and we basically won every game. And we went up to play against him in the warm-up. He was getting real close to the rim on everything, basically dunking it. And I was going, oh, man, who are we going to put on this guy? He torched us for about 25, handed us the biggest loss of the season. And then a few years later, he's getting picked for the Mavericks. So I got to get behind him. But a hot take from mine is that Mark Cuban, the owner, I reckon he's the most beloved owner in the league by his players. I don't know if you saw today, but an absolute fan favorite, JJ Barea, awesome locker room guy, veteran for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
He's always boasting a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Shot one of the career best, 38% from 3 last year, an integral part of our championship team.
Yeah.
Absolutely integral. And Cuban, he took care of him in this offseason. 1 year, $2.6 million, guaranteed deal. And it's just a big thank you for 11 years with the Mavs. And Cuban knew he was going to get released, and he knew he wasn't going to make the roster. But to give him that money and to basically set him up to potentially be picked up by another team next season, I really hope he finds a team. And I think it's a respectful and a classy move from Cuban. I think players on opposing teams will see stuff like this, and they'll know you're a priority when you're on the Mavs roster, and you can't say that Cuban's cheap at all. So I suppose hot take is that the Mavericks is where you want to be if you're a player looking out for your own interests.
It was Dallas-Denver that was going on back in March, and the sort of whole coronavirus situation was unfolding. Games were being cancelled. Pelicans were playing Sacramento, I believe, when they got called off after warm-ups. And this was all transpiring while it was entering the fourth quarter of that Dallas-Denver game. Cuban was being asked for interviews. Everything he handled was just first class. Then straight away, I believe it was in the post-game press conference, he was the first one to take a stand on the fact that staff would still be getting paid. He would ensure that all of those people there behind the scenes, not even players, just operational staff, anyone that has anything to do with the Mavericks lineup were, still guaranteed a job and some form of payment, obviously being able to foresee that there was going to be a shutdown. And you compare that to in Philly, I know our owners in particular were very hesitant to pull the trigger on paying out support staff. And it took Embiid to actually come out and say that he was going to pay before the owners actually realized, oh crap, this is not a good look if we're not still paying the staff during this period, or at least avoiding any pay cuts. So yeah, Cuban's at the top of the list. I think there's every chance that having a three-headed snake in entering the 2021-2022 season, if the man from Milwaukee decides to not sign that Supermax, which will be interesting to keep note over the next 10 to 13, 14 days, because he does have right up until the start of the season before he needs to sign that deal. So yeah, time is running out. For me, it's too obvious that Doncic wins the MVP, so I actually don't think he will. That's my hot take. I've just looked at the sports bet odds. He is currently the favorite at $4.50, closely followed behind by Giannis at $5.50, AD at $8.50. I think anything could happen. There's obviously going to be, the main thing that we've spoken about, which goes to show how important depth is. But for this season in particular, I mentioned it in a previous podcast, but 10 to 12 days a guy's out if he gets corona this season. So that's potentially 3 or 4 games, depending on what your schedule is for that period of time. But that puts a heavy emphasis on making sure you go, 1 through 12, 1 through 13, because there's going to be times where you really need to call on guys to stand up. And that's why I think their rosters for the NBA are 20, if I'm not wrong. I think they allowed them to sign 6 extra guys, just obviously foreshadowing the fact that, guys are going to get positive COVID tests just through the fact of not being in a bubble. But the fact I don't have Doncic is probably my hot take as MVP. And I actually have a dark horse. I think Lillard could snatch it. I'm very high on Portland this year. I think Portland could go top 4. Everything I'm seeing from them is very reminiscent of, how they went a couple of postseasons ago, going to the Western Conference Finals, losing to Golden State, but they got Covington. That's a huge addition for them. Nurkic is back healthy. He showed some really positive signs in the bubble. Zach Collins can probably do a bit more this year. Who's to say Anthony Simons can't do more this year? I want to see a bit more out of Gary Trent. He was obviously great in the bubble, but I think he can step up even more. You've still got Carmelo. Rodney Hood's coming back from an Achilles. I'm sure I'm missing out on a couple of other guys, but even CJ McCollum himself, they signed from Miami, Derek Jones Jr. So, they're a team that goes 1 through 13, 14 deep as well. So I think even if they get hit with a few COVID tests, unless it's Lillard, there's nothing that should stop them from finishing top 4. And I think if a team can finish top 4, that's probably the baseline that you need to be if you're going to win MVP. It's very rare that a guy gets MVP if your team's outside of the top 4. It has to be extreme circumstances. How do you feel about Doncic winning the MVP? Is it just in your mind it's his kind of to lose type thing?
I think the American media is in love with him in a lot of ways. Him being a white player who's kind of risen up against, he plays a different style to everyone else, you know what I mean? There's a big fairy tale about him coming from Europe and such, and which I love. I reckon it's awesome. But when it comes to MVP, if the Lakers are the top seed, I don't know how LeBron could get snubbed again. He showed in the bubble just how dominant he is. Obviously, he has Davis with him producing at an all NBA level. And Giannis will have something to prove again this year, as he always does. Like, if he's able to add more of a jump shot to his game, there's no reason why he couldn't be an MVP again. The addition of Drew Holiday makes them better, I think. It'd be interesting to see what happens, I think, in the Eastern Conference, just because I feel like that's a lot more winnable. Like, you could be a dominant player in the Eastern Conference if you're a Jimmy Butler, if you're a Joel Embiid, if you're if you're a healthy Kevin Durant, you could be the best player in the Eastern Conference pretty quickly. Exactly. Western Conference, it's just flooded with superstars, like the way that Jokic carries his team. I think Luka, he'll thrust himself right into that conversation, but the only way for him to pop over the top is really for us to be a 1 or 2 seed, I think, for him to be in that top MVP discussion. And like you said, my Portland, I really like what they did as well. And my brother's diehard Portland fans, so we're having that conversation, which team's better pretty much every time we're together, which team's got better moves in the offseason, who's better head-to-head, Lillard or Doncic. And it's always a fun matchup, the way he pulls up from everywhere and just shoots at a high percentage from way, way, way out. Like, I think he's even taken a jump closer to a guy like Curry. I think, you see him on the cover of NBA 2K, like, he's got all the shoes, he's got all the bars, he's got all the albums. Like, Dame's one of my favorite guys in the league for sure. And I'd love to see him win an MVP. I reckon that'd be freaking awesome.
Yeah, well, I think his odds at the moment are something like $18. So if there's anyone out there that likes going a value pick, likes having a flutter, he is 18. He is 18 at the moment.
I'm not going to put pressure on Doncic to put money on him. No way. If he wins it, great. But I'd rather take the NBA championship or a finals berth. Yeah,
for sure. All right. Well, that wraps things up. Looking at Dallas here. Darcy, this has been awesome. I'm very jealous of you as a Mavericks fan. Going from Dirk to Doncic just makes things not fair that you guys can go from one superstar European to another.
Shout out to Atlanta for that one.
Yeah. Thank you to their front office and Travis Schlenk for thinking that. What was his thinking? Trae Young would be the next Steph Curry, and that Kevin Huerter would be the next Klay Thompson. Which, look, who's to say it couldn't in 5-10 years? But immediately, it's already looking like the worst trade in recent history.
I was hoping to see something from Golden State this year, and I
Yeah.
think the dynasty's over, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's a good point to mention. That sucks that that's sort of all taken place. So now look, who's to say Dallas can't go on a run and win it all this year? It could be crazy. Crazier things have happened. 2020 is a wild year. 2020 is going to be a wild season. I'm super excited.
Absolutely.
I know you're pumped.
Gotta
Darcy,
believe.
got to believe 100%. Darcy, appreciate the time.
No problem, Chris. Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.